Last time on Sprigg Plays Lamento Beyond the Void. Asato watched Konoe out of the corner of his eyes, but immediately looked away again, then muttered in a soft voice, "Hungry." "Huh? Are you hungry?" And here we go. Konoe reached out a hand to grab a dried cume and tossed it in his mouth. The strong, sour sweetness spread through his mouth, and for some reason he felt relief sink into the pit of his gut. Finally, feeling he could relax, a soft sigh leaked from his lips. "Is it good?" Konoe nodded honestly to Asato, who'd asked him hesitantly. "I see." Asato finally looked straight at Konoe, and his mouth relaxed as if he were relieved. When he smiled, he looked like a child, Konoe thought. While Konoe ate, Asato stood up and returned to offer him water from a small cup. "You can drink this, too." "Sorry." "It's alright." Again, there was silence, but it wasn't tense this time. Like the swaying flame of the lamp, it was a soft silence. After he ate 3 more fruits or so, and drank some water, Konoe quietly looked up at Asato. "What about you?" "Huh? Aren't you going to eat?" "I'm fine." The faint light illuminated his jawline. As the flame shook, the pupils of his dark blue eyes relaxed into wide circles. Looking up at Konoe from time to time, Asato seemed more like a cornered animal than a cat. His eyes were unexpectedly gentle. The glaring eyes from their first encounter now seemed imagined. That reminded him. Asato must have noticed that the symptoms Konoe was afflicted with were different from the state of the Kirin cats. Plus, the elder practically forced him to take care of Konoe. This must be unpleasant for him. "It's troublesome, isn't it?" "What is?" At the return question, Konoe kept quiet. Konoe hadn't meant to ask, but he carelessly spoke anyway. He didn't like talking about these things, asking his companions how they felt about him. As Asato thought, time seemed to stand still. Konoe couldn't stand it. He wanted to beat his head against the wall, but he held back. Getting neither an affirmative nor a negative, he just didn't know how to handle these sorts of situations. If his companion really hated it, he'd feel like a burden and would feel awkward asking someone to take care of him. He'd rather sleep outside. Asato watched Konoe, not understanding what he meant. Konoe gradually became embarrassed and turned his face away, putting the cup of water aside. "They're both so awkward, I love it." He opened his mouth boldly. "Well, the elder ordered you to watch over me. If you actually hate it, I just thought I'd apologize, that's all." His voice trailed off. "Oh," Asato answered vaguely. It neither confirmed nor denied what he said. Left feeling uneasy, Konoe's tail involuntarily stood stiffly. Asato suddenly met his eyes, peering closely at Konoe. Konoe lowered his gaze because he was being stared at. Your eyes are beautiful." What?" he answered reflexively. What did he say all of a sudden? This came out of nowhere, and he didn't understand what Asato meant. "Not really, it's just a common color. You can find it anywhere." "No." Asato shook his head lightly, then looked at Konoe from the corner of his eye. "It's not the color. Your eyes, when we fought, they were powerful." When they fought, he was talking about when they'd first met. He was just desperately trying not to succumb to Asato's bloodthirst. "And your fur, too. And you have a crooked tail." Pointing it out made Conway feel his anger boil. He felt like Asato was pointing it out just to embarrass him, A crooked tail was by no means attractive. Well, sorry for having a crooked tail. At that blunt answer, Asato's ears stood straight. No, I think it's pretty. Konoe didn't really know what Asato meant. He's flirting with you. Considering it, he looked at his own tail. Konoe tried to wiggle its tip. It was just an ordinary tail, nothing really special about it. Konoe, you gotta love your damn self. Instead, it looked scruffy from his tumble earlier. Compared to his, Conway looked down to Asato's tail. Even though they were the same jet black, he thought Asato's was much more beautiful. Since the fur was shorter than Konoe's, it had a shiny surface and was glossy. Well, yours is prettier. Huh? Asato looked at Konoe with wide eyes. Konoe had only said what he honestly felt, but when he saw Asato making a face like that, he felt like he'd done something wrong. Konoe hung his head with a sour look. He felt like everything he did and said was strange. That was the first time. A low mutter broke the awkward silence. That anyone said that to me. Konoe reflexively lifted his face. Asato's face became awkwardly stiff, just like a scolded child who had done something bad. But he didn't look like it was that much of a bad thing, though. Maybe he was just embarrassed. Awkward words. Awkward behavior. Even though he had those frightening eyes when he'd swung his knife. He's a big old cutie dork pie. You're a weird guy, Konoe muttered without thinking. Asato blinked a few times as if he were caught off guard. I'm weird. But you're weird too. Like really, really weird. Huh. Konoe was a little offended by what he said. Well, you're much weirder than me. Really? Really. I see. I'm just kidding, he answered back. Asato's responses were far too honest. It was a little bit funny. He seemed just like a kid, even though his body was big. When Konoe laughed softly, the air around Asato softened slightly. Your name. What should I call you? Konoe. Konoe. As if he had given him a delicious candy, Asato mouthed Konoe's name to himself several times. Konoe felt strangely tickled. Konoe. Asato suddenly held out his hand. I can fix it. Fix what? That thing for your arm, since I tore it. Konoe realized he was talking about his gauntlet. After removing it from his bag, he handed it to Asato. You can fix it? I can. Asato held the cloth in his mouth and got up, retrieving something from a shelf and returned. He wound a thread tightly around a thin, sharpened stone and began to sew the torn part of the gauntlet. Conway watched in amazement at the unexpectedly delicate way his bony brown fingers moved. Amazing, he muttered in admiration, and Asato lowered his eyes as if he were a little embarrassed. After that, he made an apologetic face. I'm sorry about back then. Huh? I was told to get rid of the intruder, so that's why. Instantly remembering, Conway shook his head at the thought. I understand. Don't worry about it. I see. That's good. Asato's voice was tinged with relief. The tear on the gauntlet was mended quickly, and it was returned to its former state. He gave it back to Konoe. Thanks. It's nothing. As he put on his gauntlet, he sensed a gaze on him. Asato was staring at the marks on his arm. You're not going to ask? Ask what? About this body? Asato averted his eyes and looked puzzled, but nodded slightly. If you don't want to talk about it, I won't ask. If you want to talk about it, then tell me. Asato's awkward concern made Conway felt that his impression of him was steadily changing. In some ways, they were similar, he thought. Probably because of his relief, he couldn't hold back a yawn. Remembering his fatigue, he tried to curl up. It's okay if you sleep a little. Use the bed. What about you? Well, I'm fine anywhere. Asato slowly got up, then showed Konoe the bed. Konoe hesitated for a moment, but couldn't bring himself to decline such a gesture of precious goodwill, and he followed obediently. Asato sat down on the ground and rolled onto his back. Konoe took off his coat and carelessly put it somewhere before crawling under the blanket. It felt nice, but it smelled different from his own bed. Not much time had passed since he left Karou. Still, it felt like it had been ages since he'd slept in a warm bed. He realized he was happy with just that much. While purring faintly, Konoe started to nod off into a shallow sleep. Cue dream sequence. Half asleep, he heard a muffled voice from beyond his blanket. I don't hate you. Not at all. Because of his sleepiness, he couldn't hear it clearly, but he wagged his tail in response. He then fell into a more peaceful sleep than any he had had in a while. Cue dream sequence. No? At that time, they were unaware of what was happening in Kira. Kill him? They heard voices. Kill him, kill him. The voices descended on all the cats of Kira, whispering softly in their ears. You saw him. Those were the signs of the curse. Can we just let him run loose? Shouldn't we run him out of the village? He's no good. He's probably up to something. That guy, what if he's a Meiji cat? If we let him go, it'll be the end of us. It began to trigger their destructive emotions. They wouldn't forgive this stranger. It was crucial if they wanted to protect the pride of the Kira village. They had to expel him now, obliterate into darkness anything that threatened Kira. Anyone who threatened Kira, no matter who, no matter how many, get rid of them. Kill him, expel him. The whispers stirred the hearts of the cats in Kira. Red flames rose inside their chests. The voices rose from there as well. Their pupils narrowed and deep growls escaped from their throats. A shadowy figure stood in the center of the fog-shrouded village of Kira. The shadow was clad in flames. The black heat waves, bordered in red, swayed and rose into the air. Wonder if that's a certain red snake we know. The shadow's crimson hair billowed and he smiled in amusement. His slightly parted lips spun the words, expel him,